Good afternoon and welcome to the Daily Beat here on I-24 News. I'm Michal Divon, live from Jaffa, and here are today's headlines. The United States and Palestinian Authority react with skepticism to Israel's new coalition after hardliner Avigdor Lieberman officially joins as defense minister. The Iraqi army presses on with a major offensive to recapture the strategic city of Fallujah. And Democratic frontrunner Hillary Clinton comes under fire once again as the State Department says her use of a private email server was never approved. Good afternoon. Once again, we begin here in Israel, one day after a deal is officially struck between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and newly appointed Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman. Criticism continues to pour in over the old-new alliance, which saw the resigning of Moshe Ya'alon and a failed, and some would say even embarrassing, end to negotiations between the Likud and left-wing Zionist Union Party. The U.S. was quick to voice concern over the new alliance, giving it a chilly reception, with State Department spokesman Mark Toner saying it raises, quote, legitimate questions. Meanwhile, the Palestinian leadership also voices concern over the recent developments, putting into question Israel's intentions of reaching a settlement with the Palestinians. So one day after the coalition agreement is signed, what's to be expected from the new right-wing government? I-24 News' Eli Hochenberg sums up the latest.
The newly expanded Israeli coalition had yet to be formally approved, but concerns already exceed Israel's borders. Only hours after the official announcement over the entry of the hawkish Avigdor Lieberman to Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition, and days before his appointment as defense minister is to be accepted, Washington expresses doubts over the hardline nature of the impending new government.
We've also seen reports from Israel describing it as the most right-wing coalition in Israel's history. This raises legitimate questions about the direction it may be headed in, and what kind of policies it may adopt. But ultimately, we're going to judge this government based on its actions.
It appears that Netanyahu himself predicted such criticism, and already on Wednesday, when announcing a deal with Lieberman was reached, he reiterated his commitment to talks with the Palestinians.
My government remains committed to pursuing peace with the Palestinians, pursuing peace with all our neighbors. My policy has not changed. We'll continue to pursue every avenue for peace while ensuring the safety and security of our citizens.
Lieberman is infamously known for his hard stance on security-related issues, which included, among others, numerous controversial statements on the Arab minority in Israel and the Palestinians. This despite his recurring statements in favor of the two-state solution. The news were not accepted well in Ramallah either, as PA officials stressed that with Lieberman as defense minister, the prospects of renewing peace talks are very much gloomy.
And to discuss the recent developments in Israel, we're now joined in studio by member of the Israeli parliament, Sharren Haskel, from the ruling Likud party. Thank you very much for being here with us this afternoon. First of all, I'd like to get your reaction on this report and the U.S. concerns over this new coalition.
Well, I think that these concerns, there's certain advisors who, with the current administration, have been analyzing the situation in the Middle East in a certain way. Unfortunately, the way that they analyze it in that particular way had not just created certain threats on Israel, but also on other countries that are surrounding us as well. We've seen it with different actions that they were promoting as well with this current administration. And so, you know, I wouldn't buy into this little panic, I would probably call it, of these right-wing government.
But how would you react to those who are calling the new government the most extreme and right-wing in the history of Israel?
So there were far more extreme right-wing parties in Israel beforehand that were sitting in the government. So I won't call it like that. And you can hear these voices not just in Israel. I mean, even in Europe. Facing the crisis that Europe is facing at the moment, a lot of the people have elected more right-wing governments. And you hear the same criticism there. Unfortunately, Benjamin Netanyahu has been very successfully analyzing the situation and the reality in the Middle East. He's bringing the right result. And the first thing that's the most important for him is the defense of Israel. We've seen it in every action that he actually did. And so analyzing the reality in the Middle East at the moment, I think this is probably some of the best choices that he has done.
And I just want to point out what you said about drawing a certain parallel between the right-wing governments that are being elected in Europe and a more right-wing government in Israel as a reaction to today's reality. However, these governments, especially in Europe, are getting a lot of criticism because of their anti-immigration stances, some even calling them racist. Do you think there is a parallel between Israeli right-wing and European right-wing parties?
Well, we need to understand that the world is facing a huge crisis, and it is called extremist Islam, which bring terrors not just to Israel, but to Europe, to America, to everywhere around the world. And so, unfortunately, some of the left-wing government have failed in bringing results to this crisis that we are facing now. And therefore, the reason is that they see the solutions in more right-wing governments. And so this pattern is happening as well in Israel.
Now, I'd like to go back to Israel and the appointment of Lieberman, which comes amid a crisis of confidence, if you can call it, between the administration and the IDF, with Ya'alon backing IDF senior officials right before resigning. What do you see moving forward?
Well, it's not a secret that Ya'alon is a close friend of mine, and you know, he's part of the founding ideology of our party, of the Likud party, and I was very sad to see him leave. Ya'alon was the most experienced and the most responsible person to hold this position. And so he leaves his position, and Lieberman will have to fill really big shoes. And his actions are going to be judged by all of us, and we'll view it closely.
So with many people believing that Ya'alon is the most suitable person, and many within the ruling party, some not as vocal, very sad to see him go. Can Lieberman fill these shoes when just a few weeks ago the coalition, the Likud itself, said that he isn't even fit to be a security analyst?
So with this, I would say that I trust the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's not just leaving him the office, and he's gonna help him getting into it. He's taking part, and he's the one who, at the end of the day, is in charge of giving the orders. He's our Prime Minister, and so I put a lot of trust in him. I understand the position that he is. I mean, we're in a very narrow coalition, and for the sake of the public and of the party as well, we have to expand it. And so, you know, he was facing a lot of pressure, and he had to bring results, and so he didn't have any choice. He has to expand the coalition. And
but let's talk about other partners inside the coalition. Finance Minister Moshe Kahlon, often described as the dove in the coalition, tried to stall these talks, and this was something that was made quite publicly. Do you think he will remain a stable partner in the governing coalition?
He is definitely staying as a stable partner in the coalition. He's not going anywhere. He's got very important portfolios. Him and his ministers, they're doing good work as well. And the public voted them in to come and make changes in our day-to-day life. I mean, it's not, the ideology between Kahlon and between Lieberman are not that far apart, especially on issues like cost of living and welfare and you know, all our economical and social problems in Israel. And so I can see them cooperating under the government of the Likud as well.
Now, another relationship in the spotlight was, of course, Lieberman and Netanyahu, who just recently bashed each other, as I mentioned, and were seen yesterday at 11 a.m. once again putting trust in one another. How should the public see this sharp shift, and how are they able to trust their words now, which are so different than what they were just 1-2 weeks ago.
Yeah, well, I think we've heard from Lieberman mainly, calling our government in nicknames, saying that it will fall and demolish in a few months, and we've seen that wasn't the reality. And I think once he realized, the strength of Netanyahu and the ruling of the Likud party in Israel, he realized that if he wants to make an impact, he has to join in. And I think also there was a lot of pressure from the public because his voters are right-wing voters, and they expected him to enter this right-wing government. And so I think from all of these pressure, he decided to back up on some words that I think he probably wished he wouldn't have said before and join our government.
Yesterday, definitely. And people are saying it's the natural partner for Netanyahu, although we do know that he had what Netanyahu says were very serious talks with the Zionist Union Party. Any probability that they would join or consider joining the coalition, I mean, the way that things ended or the way this coalition was signed, in many ways made the Zionist Union Party look very bad in the face of the negotiations. And I think it would be very hard for them for Netanyahu to regain their trust.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of leadership problem in the Zionist camp. There's a lot of internal issues with them that they have to resolve. Netanyahu said as well that the door is still open. He's still, he hasn't closed it. And if they would want to come and sit in our government, we can sit and negotiate. I think that the experience of running portfolios as ministers will actually benefit this party, that most of the members who are sitting there don't have any experience in running ministries, And so when they are facing elections, saying that they might be a party for leadership and not having any experience in leading the country, I think it's sort of have a big hole in their whole plan.
So you're saying these were professional decisions, although then, of course, Lieberman's appointment could come into question, but we'll leave that for the next time. Shiran Askel, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot
for
joining
us this afternoon. Israel's maritime border with Gaza has also been cause of daily friction. Earlier this year, Israel expanded Gaza's fishing zone. However, Gazans say it is not enough to make a living. Senior defense correspondent Shai Ben-Ari spent time at an Israeli naval base to bring us this story.
The Israeli blockade on the Gaza Strip has now been in place for nearly 9 years. Israel allows a certain amount of goods to enter Gaza over land after strict security checks, but the economic situation in the Strip remains dire. The ruling Hamas movement is currently under heavy fiscal pressure, with Egypt cracking down on smuggling tunnels running under its border. The militant group itself invests much of its resources in preparation for another round of warfare with Israel. Fishing is one of the top 3 sources of income for the nearly 2 million Palestinians who live in the Gaza Strip. This means that there is intense internal competition among Gaza fishermen for fishing territory. Israel allows Gazans to fish within a defined fishing zone, which last month was extended to 9 nautical miles from the coast in most places. Still, this area is not large enough to sustain the needs of the Gazan fishing industry, and Palestinian fishermen consistently try to exceed the limits. These attempts lead to frequent confrontations with the Israeli Navy.
9 or 12 nautical miles is not enough. According to the Oslo Agreement, it should be 20 miles, so that fishermen have the freedom to fish during all seasons.
Encounters at sea begin with verbal warnings issued from Israeli Navy vessels. If these are not adhered to, the fishing vessel is encircled, with the next steps being warning shots, first in the air, then aimed at the prow of the vessel. The extreme scenario will see the fishing boat boarded by Navy soldiers and its crew members arrested. They will typically be brought to a naval base, interrogated, and released back to Gaza after a few hours. The Navy is under strict orders not to physically harm fishermen, even when they exceed the defined fishing zone. The IDF told I-24 News the Palestinians are well aware of this, and that the fishermen effectively take advantage of the situation, knowing they are not risking their lives when they defy the warnings of the Navy. While the vast majority of Gaza fishermen are focused on making a living, the IDF stresses that Hamas has recently enhanced its efforts to smuggle arms from Egypt's Sinai Peninsula to Gaza by using fishing boats in disguise. Around 5 vessels carrying arms have been stopped over the past year and a half, but others are thought to have made it through.
And we're now joined in studio by our senior defense correspondent, Shai Ben-Ari.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So, Shai, this is definitely a subject which causes daily friction. If you can maybe explain to us what kind of cooperation and what characterizes the cooperation between the IDF, the Army's Navy, and the Palestinian fishermen on a daily basis, as you were able to see.
Right. There's a lot of interaction, you could say. It's something of a game of cat and mouse, really, that happens on a daily basis. The results of these interactions are rarely lethal. There are sometimes cases of injury, but that is also rare. The IDF told us, actually, that these fishermen sometimes place children in the front sections of these boats to act as something of a human shield. To prevent even these warning shots from being aimed at the prows of the vessels, to protect the vessels. But what typically happens, and it happened also a few days ago, is that these vessels, if they exceed the limits of the defined fishing zone, they are then confiscated. They're boarded, tied to the naval vessels by ropes, and then confiscated.
After warning shots are fired?
Right, after warning shots and verbal warnings. They're brought to shore, they're typically interrogated, then released after a few hours. It happened a few days ago with about 10 fishermen. That was the scenario also. It is often the case that the same specific fishermen will find themselves again and again, or not exactly find themselves, but on purpose, basically exceeding the limits, looking for fishing zones or areas that have not yet been occupied, and will find themselves going again and again to be interrogated in the naval base near Ashdod. They know that not too much will happen. They will be released eventually back to Gaza.
And how does the IDF describe the cases in which fishermen are actually injured? So there are warning shots, but then there's actual fire targeting the boat.
Sometimes it does get complicated, and obviously the IDF has an interest in playing down these incidents and making them as rare as possible. The IDF has stressed to us that it has a specific interest in allowing fishermen to indeed proceed with fishing activity. It realizes the importance of economic prosperity to the extent that it is possible in current conditions, of course, in the Gaza Strip. But the IDF sees this as a strategic interest from its own point of view. It realizes that if there is a prevention of Palestinians being able to seek a decent livelihood, that comes with a price, basically leading to the rise in the level of violence.
Indeed. Now, speaking of the term siege, which is often being used, of course, referring to land, sea, and air blockade on Gaza, there are tens of trucks every day, and there are fishermen who are able to go out to sea on a daily and regular basis. How would you describe this term, which isn't really accurate, and how many do go every day? What are the numbers?
Right. We're talking about a situation which you could characterize as a blockade. There are certainly limits on economic activity going in and out of the Gaza Strip. Most of the goods that Israel does permit, or all of the goods that Israel does permit to go into Gaza, go over land. In these trucks, it's quite a few per day. There have recently been increases in the amount of trucks, and also even cement, which of course is used for construction. That's a specific, very touchy sort of subject, because a lot of this cement often does go into the efforts to rebuild the attack tunnels against Israel. But in terms of the fishing activity, we're talking about 1,000 fishing vessels estimated to operate in the Gaza fishing zone. It's hard to say exactly how many fishermen. It's thought to be several hundred. There is, of course, the issue...
thousands of permits.
Right. We're talking about the issue of smugglers is really the main concern when it comes to these fishing vessels. It's something that the IDF can spot fairly easily. When you're talking about a smuggling fishing vessel carrying arms or weaponry, often related to
so kind of a
rockets.
tag of war between the permits that the IDF wants to issue and those that are being abused. Shai Ben-Ari, thank you very much for joining us.
Sure.
The Iraqi military offensive aimed at retaking the city of Fallujah from the Islamic State is entering its third day amid reports of civilians in danger as fighting presses on. Anna Ehrenheim has the latest from Iraq.
Iraqi forces continue to clear areas around Fallujah, the staging ground for many, if not all, of recent attacks in Iraq's capital of Baghdad and Sadr city. tightening their siege on Islamic State group fighters inside. With the jihadists surrounded and outnumbered, the recapture of their iconic bastion looks ultimately inevitable, especially after the Islamic State suffered a string of losses in recent months. The Hashd al-Shabi umbrella paramilitary organization, dominated by Tehran-backed Shiite militias that are heavily involved in the operation, said ground was also gained south of Fallujah.
We advanced yesterday towards this area, which is 500 meters from the bridge of Sijaria, which is more like an intersection. We found a bomb-making factory, and you can see bombs and the tools they use to make the bombs, the oxygen bottles and cables.
Iran's Major General Qasem Soleimani is also reported to have arrived in the eastern outskirts of Fallujah to supervise the ongoing push to retake the city. Images on social media showed him meeting with former Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, and that has sparked anger from some Sunni leaders who have said that they fear that the Shia militias have come to exact revenge, not liberate the city. The coalition of Western Arab nations launched airstrikes against the Islamic State in mid-2014, after the group seized control of large parts of both Iraq and Syria, declaring an Islamic caliphate. Ramadi, the capital of Anbar, was lost to the Islamic State a year ago, but was brought back under government control earlier this year. But it remains unclear what kind of defense the Islamic State is prepared to put up in Fallujah. And tunnels discovered by Iraqi forces just south of Mosul is just one possibility that the Iraqi army and Shia militias might have to contend with. Thus, Fallujah, a city that looms large in modern jihadist mythology since 2004 battles saw U.S. forces suffer some of their worst losses since the Vietnam War, is once again a battlefield.
And we move to the United States. Earlier this month, the Obama administration told public schools they must allow transgender students to use the bathroom that matches their gender identity. Now, a group of states have joined together, suing the government against this new policy. Shelby Weiner reports.
11 states are now suing the U.S. government after a groundbreaking push for transgender bathrooms by the Obama administration. Led by Texas, the bloc of states are fighting to overturn the policy change that will allow public school students to use the gender bathroom they identify with.
The state of Texas filed a lawsuit against the U.S. Department of Education and the Department of Justice regarding their directives that open up all school bathrooms to people of both sexes.
The White House sent a letter to schools this month that stated they must allow students to use the toilet that matches their gender identity in order to get federal funding under existing rules. The national debate on transgender rights has been heated since the controversial directive was announced. The Republican Party has been staunchly against the move. Many conservative states have vowed not to comply with the policy on concerns of safety.
The administration has conspired to turn workplace and educational settings across the country into laboratories for a massive social experiment, flouting the democratic process and running roughshod over the common sense policies protecting children and basic privacy rights.
The case accuses the federal government of rewriting laws by administrative fiat. Questions of federal funding and legal authority will remain in the spotlight as the complicated issue comes to court.
And from the U.S., we move back to Israel, a new angle for Birthright, connecting the Jewish diaspora with the Jewish state. This year, thousands of participants were introduced to Israel's startup ecosystem, hearing lectures from some of the country's entrepreneurs. I-24 News has the latest.
Birthright Israel has grown to become the single largest student travel organization worldwide, bringing 550,000 young Jews from over 60 countries to visit the Holy Land. As the summer begins, these young vacationers are beginning to flood the country. But these aren't ordinary tourists. A new initiative is plugging in international students to daily life and business here in Tel Aviv.
Our participants get to meet with icons of the Israeli startups industry, the high-tech. They meet with very successful entrepreneurs.
The organization is working to broaden the global awareness of Israel's growing and glowing high-tech scene.
I think that the level of awareness is much, much lower than the reality. Israel, for example, is #1 in the world in terms of startups per capita. The young participants that come over are not aware of it.
And the experiences on Birthright can be key for impressionable postgraduates. The introduction to the country's vibrant startup ecosystem comes at a pivotal time for their budding careers.
And I think that it really is a telling story that such a small country can create such an impact internationally. Just an example, something like Intel or something like Waze, things that we use every single day from New York all the way to China and back, and coming to kind of its home place and where it was founded is really an exciting opportunity. Not only from a living perspective, but from a business and from an entrepreneurial perspective.
Introducing young Jews to Israeli startups bridges the gap from the religious history to the technological future. And the narrative of Tel Aviv's startup miracle grows a little stronger with each Birthright visit.
And we're going to take a short break, but in just a few minutes, we'll be back with more news from today. Stay with us.